वेलकम व्यूअर्स, मैं हूं अनीस फारूकी और प्राइम टाइम की एक एक्सक्लूसिव एपिसोड, एक एक्सक्लूसिव डिस्कशन लेकर आए हैं। आपने देखा होगा कि आजकल कनाडा में हमारे जो सफ़ीर रहे हैं अफ़गानिस्तान में और सियासतदान हैं, मारूफ कंजर्वेटिव पार्टी के यहाँ के मेंबर पार्लियामेंट रह चुके हैं, क्रिस अलेक्जेंडर अपने बयानात के हवाले से आजकल काफ़ी ख़बरों में हैं। पाकिस्तान की दफ्तर ख़ारजा भी उनसे नाराज़ हैं एंड the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not very happy with our Honorable Ambassador Chris Alexander. So we thought, why don't we have a quick chat with him live for our audience and the global audience worldwide and the audience in Pakistan. So let me welcome Chris. He is joining us live today. And Chris, thank you for your time. How are you doing?
It's an absolute pleasure, Anis. I am well, thank you. Summer is passing too quickly.
True.
But all of these issues in Pakistan and Afghanistan obviously are of great concern. So delighted to be talking to you about them.
So lately, Chris, you've been like you. I know you and I live in the same neighborhood, and we talk about the local politics, and from then local, all of a sudden to the global, and in the South Asian region, and especially attacking Pakistan. In context of Afghanistan's situation right now, you've been very hot in the news channels and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Pakistan. What have you done like to make such waves? What's going on?
Well, first, let me defend my my right to speak out on these issues. I do think that we as citizens, where we live in East, and citizens around the world who enjoy free speech, should take the time to speak the truth about the issues that matter to today's world, because we're not going to move our countries ahead, we're not going to move our towns and cities ahead, our families ahead, if we don't get some problems solved. And for me, as a diplomat, as a politician, as now someone in the private sector, one of the deepest, most marking formative experiences for me was 6 years in Afghanistan, working alongside Canadian forces, alongside the international community as our ambassador, and then with the UN mission to try to bring peace to that country. And let's be clear, Afghanistan hasn't had peace for 43 years. I mean, that is a forever war, if there ever was one. There are very few countries in the world that have endured war for that long. And why is it the case that Afghanistan is not at peace? Obviously, there have been times when there was a civil war. Obviously, there was a Soviet occupation, which was a disaster in every way. Obviously, many things went wrong over the last 20 years with the international presence in Afghanistan. But the theme through those 43 years that has destabilized Afghanistan and made peace difficult or impossible to achieve has been the fact that since the time of President Zia, there has been an agenda, not across Pakistan, because most Pakistanis weren't aware of it, but certainly in Pakistan's military and in some of the religious parties, and certainly in the madrasas where many of the fighters were drawn from, an agenda to wage proxy war in Afghanistan. And for a decade, that agenda enjoyed the support of the United States. Let's not deny that. Saudi Arabia helped to fund it. Others in Europe and elsewhere supported it because it was against the Soviet Union. But since 1989, that proxy war has been carried out more or less exclusively by General Headquarters and by the ISI, which has a wing dedicated to Afghan affairs, which remains active to this day. And many in the United States and the UK expected that that whole operation would just be wound up after 9/11, that the shock of this terrorism on a global scale was so much that everyone would just rethink, recalculate their national interest, and this would never happen again. But it did happen again. Yeah. And the pattern of support for the Taliban continued after 2001. And when I was there, at first US officers, international diplomats with whom I worked denied that Pakistan had any role. By the time I left, people in 2009, people were pretty convinced, and I think the best informed people knew very well what Pakistan's role was. but that role has still not changed, and it hasn't been confronted. Listen, in 2014, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. He didn't use the regular army of Russia. He used troops that had been rebadged, that weren't wearing the regular army's uniform. But very quickly, the world found out that it was Russia, and there were sanctions against Vladimir Putin and his entourage for invading a very small part of Ukraine and illegally annexing Crimea, which he did later that year in 2014. Pakistan, a few generals in GHQ and in the ISI have been waging this proxy war against the whole world, against a UN NATO mission with a legal mandate from the UN for 20 years, or at least 18 of those 20 years. And yet there hasn't been a reckoning about that. I would say the public around the world still doesn't know that this has been going on. Politicians haven't been spoken openly about it.
Was this Pakistan was doing on its own, or was it with the NATO allies, the United States, the Canada, and Germany, France? They were all in it together, no?
Well, I think Pakistan's defense, when you challenge generals and DGISPR and the Foreign Office publicly about these issues, they will say, oh, of course, our allies knew about this. They were cooperating with us at the same time.
And providing money.
The bottom line is they did not know about it, and they were not supporting it.
No, but obviously somebody was funding it, right?
Quite well documented that some U.S. money. Yeah, well, Pakistan gives a huge share of its national budget to the army, a huge and growing share.
True.
And many would argue, from the World Bank and elsewhere, that this is not good management because the spending on the military has been crowding out spending on education and other issues to the cost of ordinary Pakistanis. And yes, probably some U.S. money that was given to Pakistan on and off over the last 20 years for development, for military cooperation, was redirected to this support for the Taliban. But it wasn't deliberately to support the Taliban. It was given out of American naivety. Sometimes other countries have been naive in their cooperation with Pakistan. No one, and I mean absolutely no one, and I can say this as a politician and as a former official, would tolerate for a second activity by Pakistan that led to Taliban operations in Afghanistan that killed our soldiers. So the way I would put it is this: the U.S. has been unwittingly backing both sides in this conflict. They have clearly been backing Afghanistan and fighting with Afghans. They continue to use air power on behalf of the Afghan army today, in support of the Afghan army today. But they were unwittingly funding a Pakistani military that was supporting their enemies. And that's the tragedy. There hasn't been clarity on this until recently, and there certainly hasn't been action to stop it. And let's also be clear, the prime victim of this paradox, of this contradiction in international policy towards Pakistan and towards the Taliban, the prime victim has been Pakistan itself. I don't think that support for the Taliban over 20 years has given ordinary Pakistanis anything. On the contrary, Pakistan's standard of living per capita, national income per capita, has grown, but it has fallen behind India. Pakistan is now on a per capita basis poorer than Bangladesh, the former East Pakistan, which used to be much poorer than Pakistan. And that, to a large extent, is due to the fact that Pakistan has been affected by the war in Afghanistan and the radicalism that it has funded and cultivated in Afghanistan. And again, this is not a national policy in Pakistan because it's never been voted on openly by the people. It's a policy championed by the military, which has had a lot of power in Pakistan, as we know, for decades, and especially since Zia came to power in 1977.
So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemns your tweets, your statements, and your narrative on sanctioning Pakistan, strict recommendation on the global community like stop Pakistan so we can have peace in Afghanistan. And you have to understand that strategically Pakistan is a very important country in that region, and without the help of Pakistan nothing can be achieved. So how do we expect that to happen if we isolate Pakistan from this equation?
No one wants to isolate Pakistan. If Pakistan changed its policy, brought the Taliban to a place where they actually agreed a ceasefire, the world would be happy and Pakistan would instantly be back in everyone's good graces and getting phone calls from Joe Biden and so forth. But let's look at this. Let's look at the two sides of this. First, what did they condemn in what I said? I wrote a paper and published it in March, laying out the evidence for Pakistan's proxy war in Afghanistan and arguing that we should act together to end this months ago. There was no reaction from the Foreign Office. I've been tweeting and speaking and writing op-eds and articles about this ever since. No reaction from the Foreign Office. It's a couple of days, even about Imran Khan, where I criticized him and his incompetence very strongly because he was pretending Pakistan had nothing to do with the Taliban. I have sat with him in Toronto in a friend's dining room and argued with him about the Taliban for an hour. I know him to be one of the staunchest, most needy supporters of the Taliban I've ever met in my entire life, including stronger supporter than most Pakistani generals that I've met. They did not criticize that. The Foreign Office did not criticize that. It was a tweet, a very short, simple tweet I put out with a photo of Taliban leaning against the fence erected by Pakistan along the border that I received from a contact in Afghanistan, a very reliable person. And these are Taliban fighters coming in to Afghanistan from Kurram Agency into Paktia province, about 100 of them. That is what they criticized. And I don't think it was the Foreign Office that decided to act on this. It was probably the army, because they don't want the reality of the war they are fighting to be exposed. You know yourself how dangerous it is as a journalist in Pakistan to report on these issues. Even that Western journalists have found it impossible to report on these issues. I think that dam has to burst, and we have to finally confront the truth. Now, secondly, you're right. Pakistan is a very important country. No one wants Pakistan to head into any kind of impasse or crisis. But at the same time, the world's investment in Afghanistan for 20 years to support elections, to support the emergence of institutions, to help the country recover from the darkness of the Taliban is also important. Today, the Security Council has made a statement emphasizing that they do not want to see, and this is unanimous from the whole Security Council, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan return to power in Kabul. Mm-hmm. And that's a message to Pakistan, basically, that you can only go so far in backing the interest of the Taliban. There has been a peace process where the Emirate has been around the table. It doesn't make sense for that peace process to continue if the Taliban are still fighting and trying to take Herat and Kandahar and Kabul by force, as they are doing in recent days. So the real decision maker in this game is Pakistan. Yes, an important country, but a country that will feel, I think, the force of disapproval of the whole world if they don't take the right decision.
But a country that you believe that headed by Imran Khan, who is a liar.
Yeah, when Imran Khan says that the United States was wrong, they should have brought the Taliban around the negotiating table back in 2010, there would have been uh, a, a splendid peace deal back then. And Pakistan has had nothing to do with supporting the Taliban over the past decade. He's lying. He is not lying very well. I've heard Pakistani diplomats and
They do a pretty damn good
military
job.
officers do it much more competently. I think he's a bad liar, and he's not taken seriously really anywhere. I mean, Joe Biden has called the king of Tonga, I think, before he's chosen to speak to Imran Khan, because he doesn't know. No one knows what to do with a country that thinks it is getting away with lies that no one has believed for years and in some cases decades.
So, okay. So, on one hand, we understand that Imran Khan is a puppet prime minister in Pakistan.
The selected prime minister, yes.
Selected one. And we all know who has been selected. And then we also know that Bajwa, General Bajwa, had his own doctrine, and that was the sole reason that he got an extension for his tenure. Now, do you see that extension valid, or do you see a failure for that doctrine so far with the progress we have seen internationally on the Afghan borders?
Well, I don't think the doctrine was intellectually honest either. I mean, he's talked about a shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics. Have you seen Pakistan's economic prospects improving lately? I haven't. And have you seen the policy that Bajwa inherited from his predecessors, really from Musharraf and Kayani most of all, changing? No, I haven't seen that. He's a loyal soldier carrying out the policy that was laid down by Musharraf and Kayani early in the 2000s and remains unchanged to this day. And that is to blindly back the Taliban in the hope that the world will look away and they will come back to power in Kabul. That is not going to happen. And the sooner General Bajwa wakes up to that reality, the better for everyone. The better, above all, for everyone in Pakistan.
So, do you see that the Afghan sentiments in the general population, in the political corridors or in the Taliban corridors, do they lean towards the Pakistan side, or now they are leaning towards the other side of the border, which is India, to see the constructive side rather than a destructive side? What is your opinion? You've been an ambassador in Kabul, so you should know them.
Yeah. No, I really do know them, and I'm tracking what they're saying and thinking these days quite closely. I think they're leaning towards the Afghan side these days. They're certainly not counting on India to help them in this hour of need. India doesn't have a border. India doesn't have troops there. India is not funding the Afghan National Army or providing air power the way the U.S. is. But let's be honest, U.S. and NATO troops have left. The Afghans are facing the Taliban backed by Pakistan. They didn't want it to come to this. They didn't want to have to fight in this way. But now that they are being challenged in the streets of Herat and Kandahar and Kabul, they are coming together. And I think this moment is a bit like the time under Najib, when planners in Rawalpindi thought that the government would fall very quickly, and it didn't. It held out for 3 years and only fell because the Soviet Union collapsed. Is international support for Kabul about to collapse? I don't think so. I think it could actually grow even stronger because no one wants to see the Taliban coming back to power by force. In the last 24 hours, we have seen the Taliban in the streets of Herat trying to take that city. They were beaten back by the Afghan National Army. And the people of Herat were on the roofs of their houses and in the streets shouting together in unison under moonlight, Allahu Akbar. I mean, this was a very emotional moment for Afghans, and there's been unanimous support passed in the Afghan parliament for their armed forces. all the political leaders have come together to say that they will fight together. Even President Karzai, who has not been very militaristic over the past decade, has said that if the Taliban won't agree to peace, then they will be defeated. And the same Allahu Akbar is being shouted in Kabul tonight, where there were attacks. So I don't think anyone, any outsider, Pakistani, North American, European, Indian, should underestimate the pride and patriotism of Afghans. If they are attacked, as they feel they are now, and they see it as an invasion from Pakistan, they will come together and they will fight like lions.
They will fight like lions. So here's the thing, the Taliban have sent mixed messages to the world and the media saying that they have changed. They're not going to be the same 1.0 version. This is the 2.0 version of Taliban, who will have freedom for women. They will have less Sharia law. They're not going to export any of their ideology to the global community. Do you believe them?
Absolutely not. I mean, I try not to chuckle because it sounds so absurd, but the results are actually chilling. If you are a woman or a girl in Afghanistan today, you are terrified of the prospect of the Taliban coming to power. If you are a man who worked with NATO forces or worked with the Afghan government, or is even just a professional, you are terrified of the Taliban because their goal is to destroy the human capital of Afghanistan and the institutions of Afghanistan. In the early days of this latest offensive, they killed Afghan police and Afghan officials and forced their widows to marry their fighters, more or less on the spot. I mean, that is being documented by human rights groups as we speak. Just today I was looking at a photo, I think it's from Lashkar Gah, but it may be from somewhere else in Helmand, of 5 or 6 Taliban fighters, all with their Kalashnikovs, leering into the camera, with this photo of a dead boy over their shoulders, lying face down in the street, who had clearly been killed by them. This is the stuff of nightmares. It constitutes war crimes. It constitutes atrocities. The Taliban have not changed. If anything, I think, as President Ghani said recently, they have gotten worse. They are more ruthless and capable of even darker actions, inspired perhaps by Daesh and the whole experience of the last 10 years in Syria and other countries, Iraq and other countries, which was extremely dark, as you know.
Chris, do you know the Taliban have another segment in Pakistan called TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and they are pretty active in the Pashtun tribal areas and overall Pakistan, Lahore, Peshawar. They can go do whatever they want to do, and those are definitely, we all know, they are the product of the GHQ and the ISI generals. What do you think their future is now?
Well, I think they have been used by the generals and ISI whenever the sort of mainstream Taliban has come under pressure. They've been used as a counterforce, as a counterweight sometimes, and that will continue. I mean, these are very clever and ruthless strategic planners. When they get into trouble on one front, they always have a backup plan on which they tend to rely, and the TTP will remain part of that. The unfortunate fact for Pakistanis is that the TTP has done a lot of damage inside Pakistan, and these are the wages of proxy war. By looking the other way and not challenging the army's policy of backing the Taliban and waging proxy war over 43 years in Afghanistan, ordinary Pakistanis have paid a huge price. Terrorism has come to Pakistan, and the TTP are the expression of that. But there are many other groups as well. I mean, Al-Qaeda has not broken its ties to the Taliban, as the UN has been documenting in recent weeks. Daesh continues to operate. The Afghan commander now leading the fight in Lashkar Gah said just tonight that there have been dozens, I think he said 87 foreign fighters have been killed by his forces just in Helmand province in recent days. So this is not just the Taliban, it's not just Afghans. These are fighters recruited from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they're from Punjab, they're from around the world, recruited into these units in the old way by the ISI to engage in irregular warfare and in pursuit of this dream of strategic depth, because the agenda the ISI has in Afghanistan isn't just for Afghanistan. It's about dominating all of Central Asia, and that's why they've been studiously training Uzbeks and Tajiks and Uyghurs in the arts of terrorism and assassination and complex attacks. And it's just a disastrous policy for the whole world, because these indoctrinated ideological fighters who are now operating in Afghanistan can be a threat anywhere in the world if they get the chance to deploy in those other directions. And we've seen how the first jihad in Afghanistan in the 1980s led to a wave of terrorism around the world. We've seen how 9/11 led to another wave, the Iraq War led to another wave, and the Syrian chapter was even worse. So let's hope that the world comes to its senses. I mean, I'm impressed that some of the loudest and clearest voices against this proxy war are coming from Pakistan.
Yeah.
And they're not just coming from a few people, they're coming from senior statesmen, former senators, current members of the National Assembly, courageous journalists. It's dangerous to say these things, but if enough people say them at the same time, it stops being dangerous and we actually change the direction of history, which is what has to happen.
True. Yeah, it is a difficult path to walk on, very challenging, especially for journalists. Now I have two more questions. The question is that the Durand line and the Pashtun factor in Pakistan, Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, Manzoor Pashtun, and Afghans have a long historic relations with each other, and there are mixed sentiments coming from different quarters in Pakistan, Baloch, Pashtun, Muhajirs in Karachi.
Yeah.
Do you feel that vibe sitting, you've been to Islamabad, Lahore, Peshawar and all over Pakistan. Do you see that vibe? Do you feel that? That they
yes,
have?
I do. I mean, it always made me uncomfortable among Afghans that very few were willing to acknowledge the border as a legal, legally agreed, obligatory division between the two countries. And similarly, in Pakistan, there are some who have an agenda other than just peace and an end to violence. I'd say two things on this. First, we all have to understand the complex history. Pashtuns, Baloch people, activists especially, are facing incredible challenges, dangers. Many have disappeared. Many have been murdered. Many have been illegally detained and remain under arrest. I mean, a member of the National Assembly, Ali Wazir, is still in prison without any authorization from any court, simply basically for having insulted the military establishment and challenged the idea of proxy war. Karachi, the Muhajirs, have faced serious challenges involving their own security for the past 2 decades at least.
Yep.
And Altaf Hussain, one of the most prominent political leaders of Pakistan, remains in exile in the United Kingdom. So these are deep issues that need to be sorted out. But the answer that the international community will give always is more democracy. Give people a voice. Let them publish their newspapers, organize their political parties, hold their elections, and we will come up with a solution. I think the center can hold in Pakistan if there is fairness and opportunity for all. If the current crackdowns continue and repression continues, and if freedom of expression continues to literally disappear in Pakistan, then the future will look more and more unpredictable. And outsiders like myself will certainly not be the ones to predict what will happen. So we need to work on two fronts, both to end the proxy war, which affects Afghanistan first of all, and to ensure that there's more attention to human rights issues, to national ethnic issues, and to freedom of expression in Pakistan itself, where things have gone really the wrong way in the last several years and perhaps over the longer term. Second point, borders are borders. No one of any stature in the world today is going to side with Afghans or Pakistanis who want to take a piece of the other's country away. That is just a recipe for disaster. And the solution, I think, to the current conflict has to involve something like an internationally verified end to proxy war, where ISI, GHQ, Directorate S stop doing what they've been doing for 43 years. And in return, Afghanistan embraces a historic settlement in Pakistan, recognizes with a border, the way normal countries do. Even President Karzai has gestured towards this recently. No one wants a border that is closed and where people can't move. But you can have a border that is recognized, that is legal, and that is not an inconvenience for people on both sides, as you have in many parts of Asia at the moment, and certainly within the European Union. That would be an ideal that I think many Afghans.
Well, I know that's not going to happen. That Pakistan will listen, the ISI will listen, or GHQ will follow these guidelines. It's not going to happen. They have a long-standing historic interest invested into Taliban. So what can the world do to stop this? This needs to stop right now, but how can we do it?
And it can happen. You're right, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen the way they are thinking today. But they have something called impunity. They have a sense that they're invulnerable, that they're untouchable, that no one will ever hold them to account, either inside Pakistan or outside. And that sentiment, we've all seen American hubris, imperial hubris. We've seen European powers engage in these delusions. We've sometimes seen Indian politicians think that way. It always ends in the opposite. It always comes down to earth. And I think we are approaching a moment. I'm not going to predict when it's going to happen, but we are approaching a moment when the world will confront those diehards in GHQ and in ISI who will never give up their views. And if they don't change, they will face sanctions. The international community, not just one or two countries, most democracies have very tough sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, against Iran for its proxy wars in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, elsewhere, and against China increasingly, Pakistan's other ally, for genocide in East Turkestan, in Xinjiang, an issue that Imran Khan, in his wisdom, won't even comment on. So I don't think it's realistic to expect that Pakistan would be immune from, would be an exception to this rule. Proxy war, invasion of a neighboring country is a serious matter. It was ignored, it was misunderstood for a long time, Now people see it clearly, and sooner or later there are going to be consequences which will bring that impunity crashing down to earth.
Okay, coming back to the home in our own backyard, last question. Um, you are very popular within our Pakistani diaspora in Canada, and you've been a minister, other than many portfolio, you have been a minister of immigration also, and you help a lot of people. And you and I used to meet in the mosque in Ajax, and I see the love people show you, the Pakistani community, and Pakistanis are good people. There are 220 million people.
They are good.
They are very good people, but lately with your statement there have been sentiments that you might want to clarify on your own constituents or friends and family who we to work together. What do you have to say to them, community in Canada, the Pakistani community in Canada?
Well, none of my statements reflect on Pakistanis in general. None of my statements take away from the love that my wife and I have for our Pakistani friends and for the whole society, which is amazing. It is a country that has everything, from its geography to its agriculture to its culture to its to the humanity of its people. Mm-hmm. But I'm someone who lived in Afghanistan for 6 years, and I cannot bear, and Canada, the country that we all love as citizens born here or citizens who came as immigrants, firstly, we all invested and sacrificed to make sure that after 9/11, Afghanistan could rebuild and be stable and peaceful. And that has not happened, basically because of the Taliban. And the Taliban are there basically because of Pakistan's GHQ. I don't blame my Pakistani friends for the actions of General Bajwa. I don't blame Pakistani Canadians, least of all, for the policy of the ISI. Many of them don't know what has been happening. And that's fair enough. I can understand their frustration at learning about it from someone like me, for example. But we need to face up in this day and age to reality. Canada has its own shortcomings. Look at residential schools. I'd be the first to say we made mistakes in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the world. But this proxy war that has continued for far too long is a big mistake, and it's being made by the Pakistani military. And I will speak out on that issue until it changes. And I hope many Pakistanis and Pakistani Canadians will speak out with me. Certainly the most vocal advocates of a change in policy are in Pakistan today. They are the people that I consider my mentors and my friends in this campaign to change a policy that will bring peace to Afghanistan in a way that will bring peace to Afghanistan and a much greater role for Pakistan in its region and in the world.
Good. Do you have to say anything to Imran Khan or General Bajwa in the end? A message loud and clear, especially after the statement from them and you and tweets and back and forth. Last word.
Well, I would just say, gentlemen, let's be true to our actual commitments. There's been a peace process underway in Afghanistan for 10 years. For the last 2 or 3 years, it's been quite intense, and Pakistan has had a central role. It has to end in peace. And those two gentlemen are the ones who have to take the difficult decision to actually tell those now fighting, it's over, peace is here, you're going to have a voice, you're going to have a role, but you're not going to be able to fight your way back to power. No one wants that. And those are commitments that both Bajwa and Imran Khan made. Let's live up to them. Let's be true to them. It's within their power to do so. And if they did it, if they do it, they will be remembered in their national history, and I think much more broadly, in a very different way from the way they're now seen.
Okay, what are the future plans of Chris Alexander in coming future in Canada? What are your political plans?
No political plans for the next election, which could be quite soon.
Okay.
I'm happy in the private sector. I'm happy writing and advising on international issues, but we'll see down the road. My real priority this summer and this fall is to make sure that we see an end to proxy war in Afghanistan and a turn towards a peace process that actually has a chance of succeeding. And so I thank you for the chance to discuss it with you tonight.
Yeah, pleasure in mine. Thank you very much for giving us time, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Honorable Ambassador Chris Alexander. He has been an ambassador in Afghanistan, Member of Parliament, Minister of Immigration in Canada. And that's all for tonight. I hope you got a few answers from Chris, and we try to convey the message to everybody who's watching this show. Thank you. Have a great evening.